Welcome to Participating in Research, Engaging in Clinical Trial Design as a Patient. This is the Patient Insight webinar from the Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network. There have been no new treatments are evaluated and approved for safety and efficacy. Do they actually work without the benefit of clinical trials? Patients who provide valuable insight into clinical trials, not just as participants, but also in helping to design the clinical trial, are becoming more and more of a trend. This program is supported by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute Engagement Award for Promoting Implementation of Patient Education, or PIPE. In this webinar, it's part one of BCAN's Participating in Research webinar series. You'll learn about how you as a patient or caregiver can participate and provide meaningful input into clinical trial design. You'll also hear from an expert in the field, as well as from a BCAN research advocate, a patient who's participated in clinical trial design. My name is Stephanie Chisholm, and I'm the Director of Education and Research. I'm joined today by urologist Dr. Angela Smith, along with Patty Spears, and BCAN research advocate Robert Littman. Dr. Smith is an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina Department of Urology in Chapel Hill. She has led CORI Engagement Awards with the Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network to engage patients in the research process. Welcome, Dr. Smith. It's nice to have you with us.
It's nice to be here.
Patty Smith is a 20-year breast cancer survivor and cancer research advocate. Ms. Spears is currently working as a scientific research manager and patient advocate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she leads the UNC Lineberger Patient Research Advocacy Group and the UNC Breast Spore Advocates. Welcome, Patty. It's nice to have you with us.
It's nice to be here.
And finally, BCAN research patient advocate Bob Littman has been an ardent volunteer for BCAN since our founding in 2005. He's been a BCAN research patient advocate since the beginning of the program in 2015 and is active on BCAN's online community through Inspire. Bob will share his experience as an active advisor in clinical trials. So welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, and now we'll get started. So now that we know who you are on the phone, a lot of bladder cancer survivors and patients, and interest in research advocacy. So like Stephanie said, my name is Patty Spears, and I'm a research patient advocate, and I've been a research patient advocate for a long time. And so what I'm going to talk about is engagement with patients in the cooperative groups, the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology, one of the government-funded groups. So I'll tell you a lot more about that as we go on in the webinar. Okay, for some reason it's not moving for me. There it goes. This is the outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'll talk about who are research patient advocates. Why is advocate involvement important? Why do we even do this? What do we do? What do advocates do in research advocacy? And what specifically do we do in the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology? I think giving you an example of the real things that we do in a group setting like that is really important to get a feel for what research advocates actually do. So who are research patient advocates? So there are many types of patient advocacy, and they can be defined by what we advocate for. So, for example, you can be a political advocate, a support advocate, fundraising, watchdog, and research is one of them. And it's not that I'm just a research advocate. I actually am also an advocate that fundraises for different cancer groups and do some political advocacy as well. But research advocacy is just one of those, and it's very different from all of the others. And who are those that are involved in research advocacy? So research advocacy, you can be a patient, like we all are, like most of the group is that's watching. You can be a patient group or organization, like BCAN is an advocacy group. And then research patient advocates, and I call myself a research patient advocate. And I'll describe the difference and what each one can bring to the table. I think all of us collectively are so important that I think it's really, really important a lot of times to get just that individual patient experience in a lot of the clinical trials and research. They bring the personal experience to the table. They might not have knowledge of science and research, but that's perfectly okay. They're the expert in their disease. Patient organizations and groups are really important, and these groups have access to a lot of different patients. They're usually really interested in moving new treatments forward. And one of the things when researchers and drug developers are looking for patient involvement is these patient organizations are really easy to find. And so they can easily go to these organizations and get their input, as well as maybe get information on patients that might be interested in being involved. Oops. And then research patient advocates are the next section. So research patient advocates is what I consider myself. I'm actually a patient, so I have knowledge about the disease. I also connect with other patients, and when I am a research advocate in the room, I kind of try to bring the collective thought of all the patients with me. I used to facilitate a support group for about 10 years, and I remember all of those experiences. I also try to learn more about the research because that's an interest of mine, and that's why I'm a research patient advocate. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's something that you can really build over time, kind of like learning when you go to school. You learn early things first and develop your knowledge over time. And then I belong to different patient groups. So I belong to several different organizations, and I bring that with me as well. So I feel like, you know, we bring a lot to the table because, but it's different than just like I think of, you know, when we develop something for patients that are just being diagnosed, that's not me. It's like, you know, my mom also had cancer, and it's like her. You know, will she understand what you're saying? Things like that. So I always think of the patient off the street versus the patient that's educated themselves in the science. So who are we? We're cancer patients. We've had loved ones with cancer. I've had breast cancer. My mom had breast and bladder cancer. And just, we bring all that to the table when we are advocates. Motivated to reach out to others. We're also motivated to learn more about the science and the treatments and keep up on different things and really become trained in the different areas of science. And it's not like you're going to be trained in everything. You kind of pick your niche of what you're really interested in. And I happen to be really interested in clinical trials. And the more you do it, the more you learn. And I feel like even though I've been doing this for many years, every time I do something, I learn something. So as long as you keep learning, you'll become more seasoned in what you're doing. So why is advocate involvement important? And I would say it adds urgency to the research process. And I know that you know, sometimes research seems to take a long time, trials seem to take a long time, drugs seem to take a long time to be developed. So I think that patient engagement early and often keeps that urgency right up front from the get-go. Patients understand the burden of treatments. We know how long it takes to get an infusion. Patients know what is important to them. And they can really help design clinical trials that will accrue and retain participants, because many of us have participated in clinical trials, and can help identify those barriers and those accrual problems before they even open, so that it can really alleviate saving time and money, and, you know, less changes of the protocol over time, they accrue faster, things like that. So I think it's really important to have that involvement early. And so what do advocates do? And when are we involved? So we can be involved in basic research. I think it's always important for basic researchers to have an eye for where their research is going to be impacting patients eventually, because eventually it will. And so just keeping that urgency and that grounding in the research is really good. I'll never tell you what mouse to use, but, you know, I work with a lot of basic researchers, and I think we mutually just get to know each other. Translational research, the preclinical and mouse models, also in the tissue, which I think is really important these days to get enough tissue to do those preclinical studies. And so we can be involved in that. And clinical research, we'll go more into that in more detail in clinical trials and what we do. Population research, a lot of the epidemiology studies that look at populations of people. We have a couple of studies at UNC, and so it's really kind of interesting to have patient involvement because, you know, we know the patients out there because we're one of them, and we can kind of give our input on those as well. And really in drug approval, we also have a voice. The FDA has a big patient representative program. So if you're interested in it, I would definitely look it up if you're interested in getting involved with the FDA. They use a lot of patients. And so I think somebody else is moving their mouse. Okay, and so what do the Alliance for Clinical Trial Advocates do? So this will give you some practical things about what we actually do in the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. So what is the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology? It's part of the NCTN, the National Clinical Trial Network, which is part of the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. So it's our government-funded large trials, and there's 5 groups. They're all a lot of initials, except for the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology, and one is the Children's Oncology Group. There's also a Canadian group. And so the Alliance is kind of like this group of people. We have operations, we have statisticians, we have tissue banks, we have members. There's centralized functions that are run through the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, the Central Institutional Review Board, different things that all the different groups need. And then in our specific group, we have different members that come from large academic cancer centers, as well as community cancer centers, the NCI Community Oncology Research Program. So we can get our trials that we do within the Alliance into the community cancer centers because we know most patients are treated in the community, and that really allows for a more diverse population getting into clinical trials. So it's a big operation, and as part of that operation, the patient advocates have I think, a significant role. We have a committee of about 20 advocates, and we've just had some community advocates join our group as well. And we kind of came up with this role and goals. So the role of the patient advocates in the Alliance is really to represent the perspective of the patient and their families in the development and delivery of innovative clinical trials. So our goal is that the patient advocates work together with all the other cancer professionals to develop these trials and care of cancer patients and prevention of cancer. And so we work together with nurses, clinical research professionals, oncologists, radiologists, surgeons. We work together with everyone within the team. And then, you know, who are we? We're the same as I went over before. We come from all over the United States, all walks of life, all backgrounds, all diseases. We're all different cancers. And so that we can really address the different patient issues. And we are all members of a committee. So every patient advocate that comes on board is a member of a committee. It might be a disease committee, like I'm on the breast cancer committee, or it might be a modality committee like health outcomes or health disparities, which is different. It covers a lot of different cancers. So, but everybody is involved in one committee, at least. And here are some pictures. Everybody likes pictures. We actually did a poster one year, and now they do electronic posters, which is pretty interesting. But we have meetings twice a year. So that's from 2016 and 18. This is 2019. Our group evolves over time. So I need another picture for 2020. And key roles at the Alliance. So I'll go over these in more detail, but we participate in committees, we do concept review, protocol development teams, and public summaries. So I'll go over that in more detail. And I'm a picture person, so I like to look at things over time. So here's kind of a timeline of how a study gets thought of and conducted within the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology. So an idea comes forward, and it's developed in the committee. I'll use the breast cancer, or I can use the GU committee. I've sat on those too. So a concept will come forward. It'll be discussed in committee. The advocate is in the room during the discussions, and they come back over and over again. But then once it goes in, the committee says, yes, this is a great idea. Go ahead and write it up. It gives it the thumbs up. they write a concept, and that's about 10 pages. And then once that's written, it goes to the central review committee at the Alliance to get reviewed, and the advocate on that committee reviews the concept. And then it goes to the NCI steering committee for review, which is a higher level review. And sometimes they get accepted and sometimes they don't. If they get accepted and okayed for a study, then a protocol is written, and they do a protocol development team, and we're part of that team as well. And those protocols tend to be about 150 pages. So you get to see it all along. And it's not over at that point. It still comes back to the committee once the trial is open. So you monitor accrual, you monitor all the different things going on to the trial, see if any changes need to be made. And advocates are heavily involved in that. The Data Safety Monitoring Board to make sure that things are going okay. That's always done throughout the thing. And we actually have an advocate representative on the Data Safety Monitoring Board. And then the trial's done. And then after the trial's done and when it gets published, we write public summaries of each study, and the advocates are involved in that. So we're involved in all of these different parts. And to give you just a little bit more detail about what you might do in the committee. So you're sitting in the committee, what would you think about as an advocate and as a patient that somebody else isn't going to think about? And really, it's about, I think a lot about the outcome and whether it's important to patients. Like, is this going to be practice changing, a change that I would like to see, and I think patients would like to see? Is participation going to be hard? Are there lots of visits, lots of biopsies? Randomization, does the randomization look equipoise or not? High cost. So there's a lot of different things. I have some things written here, but it can go on and on and on what you think about, because we think of things differently than the oncologists think. And then the concept review that happens there, that's something that is we have a process for it where once it comes in, I select an advocate to review it, and I usually have the advocate on that committee review it. And they have about 7 days to write the review. They send it in on a Monday, the phone call is on a Tuesday, and then a summary is sent to the principal investigator. And we actually help the advocates by giving them a guidance on how to review the concept. And so we look at study impact, feasibility, innovation, relevance, and study design. And then protocol development teams. This is where, and this is happens at the 150-page thing. The team is very diverse. There's a lot of different people on it because you need all of that input to make a good protocol and a good study. And this is about a 2 to 3 month process, but it starts as 10 pages and ends up as 150. And this is where the consent form is drafted. And so you're involved as the patient advocate on all of these drafts, and might be a couple of phone calls. And really, I look at different things like the consent form and eligibility criteria, the review questionnaires, schedules and burdens, different things like that. And so that can be, it's kind of fun to see it go from committee all the way through, but it is a lot of work on your part too. So there's a lot to learn there. I was just on one that's come back from NCI. It's very exciting, actually. And public summaries. And we think that we can really help with making the public summaries more lay friendly and understandable by everyone. And this was started by Deb Collier, and we participate in that as well. And all of our summaries can be found on the Alliance website. And here's a view that you can't read, but you can visually see how we do the summaries. And we have a template for doing it. So my final thoughts are engaging patients is really important during research and clinical trials and throughout drug development. We value things a little differently from the patient perspective, and it really needs to be there front and center very early and all throughout the whole process. Patient-centered research is collaborative, and it really focuses on the patient. And really, I think patient-centered trials might improve accrual and retention. And really, it ensures that meaningful benefits to patients are done. So I know I went fast, but I know you'll have access to these slides. So, if any questions came up, just put them in the chat box and we'll answer them later.